So if you think about how women are in power and how you're in power, and of course we've got like racial dynamics that is on the top of everybody's conversation these days with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm wondering, what does power even mean? And how do you create opportunities for women to be in power or minorities to be in power? Or what does it look like in a group dynamic when you've got natural leaders in the room and natural followers in a room? Or maybe it's the outspoken ones and the quiet ones. It's a verbal processor versus what would be the other, like a listening processor, or what's the opposite of a verbal processor? I don't know.
Maybe whatever the form of in writing.
Yeah. Okay, so there are different types, right?
Yeah.
So there's like visible power, and then there's internal power and personality styles. So you mentioned when we were chatting recently that there are 6 core ways of identifying power. Can you expand on that a little bit? Expound on it?
Yeah, and I will go back to saying that so power is something I've been thinking about very deeply in the last several weeks as a kind of probably like a pinnacle of trying to process this year. I will go back to May of this year when George Floyd was killed, and that crushed me in a way that I just hadn't ever experienced before. Like crying hard, deep tears every day for several weeks at a time. And I think part of it was having all of your greatest fears about, people like my family and like our position in this country being ripped to the surface. And also just kind of like witnessing someone being murdered for it repeatedly. I've never seen anything like that before. And so that's
sorry to hear.
The processing of, what is this? What is going on? I will say that the way I was able to get out of that period was thinking through that as painful as this is, and as painful as this year is, and as much as it may not feel like it, progress has been made over generations, right? This is a long haul struggle to be better as a nation in many dimensions, including human justice and social justice. And it's been sadly way worse in the past. And this is more exceptional than normal as it was in the past. So there are improvements being made. But it still obviously raises a lot of questions. There are a lot of challenging conversations happening now for the better, which are good. People are facing difficult things and facing fears as individuals and collectively. And as I was able to shift back into focusing on what's possible and the positive, this is where kind of power started to come to the surface of, if you want to change the world, power is necessary, right? Yeah. I think when people think about power, they often think of it in the negative, and that is one dimension of the 6 ways, but there are many elements to it. And I will attribute this to a couple of social psychologists, French and Raven, who did this work. And the 6 dimensions are labeled as legitimate, reward, expert, referent, coercive, and information. And I'm not an expert on this, but I can just share what I've been learning about those dimensions. And this is framed as the kind of power within organizations. But what's interesting about them, or what I've been thinking about, is how they show up in other dimensions, right? So legitimate is kind of positional. What is the title or the authority that's been bestowed upon you that you have? And that's just a reminder that while that is one form of power, it's certainly not the only. I think we all know, as you were saying, those natural leaders who are able to influence so much independent of whatever their title or position might be.
Yep. You can just command a room, walk in, and everybody's watching. Right. Yeah. Like you.
Well, that's right. But what you just described is reference. That's the like
Okay.
the magnetism, what they can inspire in others, that kind of personality that inspires confidence and so many other positive emotions that make people want to be a part of whatever they're doing.
Uh-huh.
That's the kind of referent power.
Okay.
Then you have reward, somewhat literally, what can you provide to others that helps build their cooperation with you? The flip side of that
Okay.
being coercive power, and that's the kind of negative one that's associated quite often, be it
So it's the
force
stick to the
or,
carrot.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Force or, punishment or, those kind of critical elements.
Okay.
Um, Interesting. There's expertise as a power, having
Okay.
a real skill set that gives unique value and that can be offered. There's a relation here to reward, obviously. Having
Yeah.
a specific skill set is in itself a form of power. And then
Mm.
related but distinct is information, the ability
Mm.
to kind of hold information back or the power to influence through information.
Oh,
Think of
interesting.
what journalists do. So,
Yeah.
there are like really interesting examples of how these many dimensions are showing up in the world right now. On the information side, there's everything that's going on with social media as an example,
Mm.
the risk
Uh-huh.
of that kind of power perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the power of the press and the deep importance of journalism and protecting journalism and that freedom that
Mm.
comes with it, as an example. Um, when I think about expertise, that's one of the ways to lift up a people is that they be educated. Like
Mm.
education is one of the greatest upward mobility engines there are. um,
Right.
because we're giving people the expertise to have the freedom to make decisions for themselves and others in a more informed way. It's just really
Right.
interesting, what it takes. And so my conclusion is, in thinking through all this, is how do we give more people more power?
Mm.
How do we change the world in the way that we want to from a place of positivity and good through power? And how do we
Mm.
enhance that for ourselves and, taking an inventory for ourselves, but also how do we expand that for others too?
Mm. So what do you think is what are your power trifectas? Do you have one that you lead with or multiple, or how does one start identifying their own power and then identify others? Is it like the Myers-Briggs where you can say, oh, I lead with this?
Yeah, I don't know what the specific methodologies are, but I was planning on like doing literally like a little drawing of each one. Like, how would I grade myself on,
Yeah.
this dimension of it? And, all six of them are important. They all show up in life one way or one time or another. And it's important to understand, I think, how to use them
Mm.
well and effectively. Um,
Yeah.
but I do think it's a good thing just as a place to start of like, how would you grade yourself on each one of these dimensions? And going back to
Yeah.
that earlier topic, I think a lot about my teams and my team members and each individual. I'm like, where are they on these dimensions? And what do I
Mm.
need to do to support them in elevating any particular one or providing feedback on others that perhaps
Mm.
need to be pulled back into balance?
Yeah.
And really being brave enough to be explicit about that, as human beings that are trying to move the world forward in a positive way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating to imagine how do you cultivate power for young people or people who are not, um, culturally incentivized to have power.
Mhm.
I had a very interesting conversation with Alana Karen just a couple of weeks ago, who is a leader at Google, and she talked a lot about how she's a very small woman, and so when she walks in the room, people don't give her a lot of credit. She doesn't have the um, let's see, what did you say was the wow factor?
Yeah,
What's the
the
leadership?
reference power.
Which one?
the reference power. Yeah.
Reference.
Not like,
Yeah.
being tall or taking up space. As I imagine.
Right, exactly. So she says she doesn't feel that she has a lot of that reference power, but that she's been able to cultivate and harness. I guess it would probably be more of the information and expertise power, and that she's very articulate and eloquent and able to communicate complex concepts quickly to many different types of learners or listeners.
Mhm.
And she did an interview. She did a series of interviews with her book that she just launched, about why women are in tech and why they stay there. And she said that, she was interviewing families that were in Asian communities and African American and Caucasian, and that each of these women have entirely different constructs of how they're supposed to be in the world.
Mhm.
Right. I think that's well known, right? Beyond her research, I think we can all arguably say that we know that there are stereotypes about different groupings, even though they may not work for every individual. There are archetypes or stereotypes, I should
Mhm.
say, more so than that. So how do you think you really, aside from my rambling, how do you cultivate more power from somebody who's not naturally comfortable in her power,
Mm.
or doesn't have that reference, or doesn't have expertise? Maybe she's fresh out of college and she shouldn't be perhaps the leader in a group of senior folks who are thinking about complex challenges she hasn't been exposed to. But let's say, as you're trying to cultivate her year over year and give her more opportunities, what would you look back on in your experience and say could be helpful as we grow our community of next generation leaders?
So I so appreciate the tee up of the framework, because I do think it's important to start by being rooted in a cultural understanding of the person you're engaging.
Yeah.
And, based on that, I might not even use the word power, because that could be
Mm,
a scary thing or feel like an inappropriate thing or not something that someone should be seeking, and
right.
derail the effort in a way. So just kind of understanding what someone's position is on that, I think, is important. Um, and then another way to kind of introduce the bigger picture here is understanding what they want to affect in the world. Like, what are they trying to
Mm,
do? What are they
mm,
trying to make possible?
mm,
And um, again, just like really anchoring on that and talking through, okay, well, what kind of actions need to be influenced in order to bring that future reality to possibility?
mm,
What is your role in that? What is your network's role in that? What are the actions that you may want to inspire or see others take in order to make that all possible? And that's all talking about power without explicitly talking about power.
I love that. I can see exactly what you're saying. And it is going back to, I feel Simon Sinek has either been increasing his communications, or the social media has figured out that I've been watching him, because I
Hey,
see him like in
it's so
every,
much these
right.
days, right?
Who knows what's real? Like, but
I can
I've been
never tell
seeing,
if it's an algorithm or reality.
right. I know. Have you been seeing a lot of him too?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh gosh. Well, it just makes me think everything that you just shared does go back to his, like, what he became famous for, with the starting with the why. And it's, what do you want to affect in the world? And then going to, like, how do you want to do it? And what are some of the ways to do it? And then I think that ultimately, another word for power could just be influence. How do you want to influence others to support you? How are you going to cheerlead? How are you going to rally? How are you going to persuade?
Yeah.
And those are a little bit softer than power. Power can be a little bit of a trigger word. I hear what you're saying, but at the end of the day, we should also see if we can um, take out some of the power in trigger words,
Right.
right? So, like, Jen Risher, who was talking about, I think you met her recently, or we talked together at the Battery with her, as she's talking about money. And she said, let's take the power out of money and let's just put it in its place. It's just a currency, right?
Mhm.
So, like, same thing with power. Power is a currency.
Mhm.
And so it's, how do we take out some of the taboo, and how do we get a little bit more comfortable in our own skin and building confidence? I
Mhm.
think for me, it's like, power is confidence.
Mhm.
And confidence comes from knowing thyself or knowing the challenges, knowing your priorities. It's that same framework that you just shared.
I mean, I also see power as freedom. It's freedom
Yeah.
to do what you want to do that you think is important in the world, and freedom to influence that into the world as well. Right.
Right. Yeah. And to be able to navigate. Yeah, exactly.
With this latest valuable episode, we'd love to thank you for joining us on the Creating Community for Good podcast. If you found today's show valuable, simply visit our website, creatingcommunityforgood.com, to leave a review, as well as to get access to additional resources and relevant links from this show. Stay tuned for more episodes.